Okay, welcome everybody to the anticipatory governance session. I'm very excited actually to be chairing this session, and I think that it's really a very good moment to have this exactly this kind of session, and also with the excellent speakers we have here. To be honest, this session somehow emerged out of the complexity of the conference organization and the ingenuity of the organizers, I think. So it's a clear case of emergence out of complexity. But I have to say, if I would have been asked to put together a session, this would have been pretty much the ideal setting. And both, I think, in terms of speakers we have here and also in terms of the topic we are going to tackle. Of course, anticipatory governance, it's something that has been discussed for a very long time in our community. We have the work of Leon and Linda and many others who have contributed to thinking about anticipatory governance, so there's a long tradition. But I think this is kind of a special moment now here, because on the one hand, we have really a deepening of the thinking about anticipatory governance. We have the handbook of anticipation, and also many more attempts to really make it work. So the excellent work of UNESCO, for example, the Futures Literacy Labs, and we have many more disciplines really setting up practical ways of, like the policy labs and the design thinking approaches, practical ways of actually doing anticipatory governance. So in a way, the theory is moving towards the practice of anticipatory governance. And on the other hand, on the governance side, or I should say maybe the government side, because it's really here government we are tackling in this session, there are also developments. We have many approaches that are not originating from the futures, but from other perspectives, like, for example, the mission-oriented approaches that are very prominent in policy at the moment. Then the transformative sustainability agenda, the turn towards more participatory approaches, citizen engagement. So from the side of the practice, there's also a movement towards a request for different types of processes of governance. So in a way, I think we are seeing something now that way back, there was this concept of embedded foresight. And at the time we were thinking of this as something a long way, a kind of vision that we, not very realistic vision, but I think we are seeing the first tiny steps towards this kind of embedded foresight in government. Of course, it's maybe my limited European perspective, and if you look at the whole picture, there may be different developments, but I really see that our futures work is moving into government. So in many governments, there's a long tradition of using outcomes from futures work, contracting out this type of thing, but we are now seeing really developments of actually doing futures work within government. So for example, Finland, I don't know whether Jana will probably tell much more about it, but I heard that for the first time they decided to do the government report on the future themselves within the government. So actually public officials are doing these things, which is very different from giving it to academia, which they used to do. And there were lots of learning processes, I heard, and very similar, I think, in Greece. We will hear more about it from Nondas. There is actually at the presidency level is a foresight team working at the presidency level, which is also Greece has a long tradition of doing foresight, using foresight, but that's a very different thing to do. Similar in Spain, actually, who has established a foresight team on the very highest level directly at the prime minister. And also EC, the JRC foresight unit. Also, personally, I worked with them like 10 years ago, and I know that they always produced things for for the easy to use, but it was very difficult to feed them in, and they were very far away from the actual decision-making process. But now they are really working with the DGs in the very beginning of the policy cycle to develop agendas. And of course, there come several problems with this movement also, because the requests are very different, but we see that the theory and practice are more and more intertwined. And last not but least, in Germany, we are here in Berlin, and we have Alexander here from the Chancellery. We also have a decades-long tradition of doing foresight in the ministries, and a lot of this was also actually done by researchers or by foresight practitioners and then used by the ministries. But now, for the very first time, on the Chancellery level, we have an attempt to actually coordinate all these things and to, they're actually doing workshops within the government, with the people from the ministries, and they're doing it themselves and not only using it, not only contracting it out. And this is why I think that this session, trying to substantiate this idea of embedded foresight, bridging between the learning we have on the theory side and the new experience we have on the government side, I think it's extremely timely, and I'm really excited to have this here. And I think also this new development in policy, it challenges us as future thinkers to also step up our theory, to really take more seriously the actual processes of policy making. I mean, this is also a decade-long narrative. We have to understand policymakers or understand decision makers and produce things that are usable by them. But it's quite a different thing of actually integrating these things into government processes. So we moved from thinking about products to thinking about processes, and now we also need to think about structures. How can we create spaces where these things are actually possible in government? So, and what can be bridging concepts that make sense in both sides? And I think, so now I come to the right people, that we have exactly the right people in the room to tackle this bridging issue. We have three practitioners who are really on the forefront of this development of embedded foresight, as I said, from Greece, Finland, and Germany. So people who can bring this experience, put the questions, the challenges out to us. And we have also the pioneers on the theory side. So I think I don't even have to introduce Roberto here, who has done this really groundbreaking work on anticipatory theory. But, and this is a good thing, he has also always put the bridge to actual practice, his book on working with future. And that's, I think, exactly what we need here. And you had the two books at the same time, I noticed. So this is exactly what we are going to do here, to bridge between anticipatory thinking and working with futures, but within government, not outside, but within government. So then we have Lars here, who is from the Lars Brothers, from the Stiftung Wissenschaft und Politik, which is by its very nature a foundation, a German foundation, more or less created to make this bridge between science and actual policy making. And he's one of also the thinkers in Germany who has always put forward the concepts, also structural concepts in policy to enable policy to think about these things. So I think, and I think also his presentation, it will present us exactly with a whole portfolio of bridging concepts between policy, practice, and future theory. And of course, here in the audience, we have many of you are in and out of policy and futures. Here, Eric, I see Eric, for example. So I think we will have a very rich discussion. A few words on the outline of the session. I think we have to adapt a bit now because we have started late, but the plan is to really have it as a dialogue session. We will start with Roberto, giving an introductory keynote on anticipatory thinking and a bit of discussion. Then Lars, with this bridging concepts, you're moving maybe a bit more into the practice more and more. And then we will have the practitioners panel of Alexander, Nondas, and Jana. Hopefully Jana will join by Zoom. And then we will have the coffee break. Maybe we are half an hour late. Maybe then we have the practitioners panel after the coffee break. Because I don't want to deprive you of the coffee break, but I also want to have everybody here for the practitioners panel. So let's have the two talks, then we join the normal coffee break, and then it's a practitioners panel. And each of them will explain a bit what are the issues they are facing in government. And then there will be an opportunity for Lars and Roberto to reply to the challenges these three bring up to us. And then I also hope everybody will join in supporting this bridge finding exercise. Okay, thank you. Then it's up to Roberto. So 5 minutes before I will give you the sign.
Okay, thank you. So thank you. I'm happy to present the issue of anticipatory governance in front of such a distinguished panel of high-level officials working with governments, because I hope that they will prove that my ideas are completely wrong. Because if I'm right, even dimly right, they are going to face very serious troubles. So let's begin and see. First, some basic introductory information. Anticipatory governance is getting hot. We know that. During the past year, there have been quite a number of workshops. There has been a big OECD international workshop. There has been a South African Institute of International Affairs, and some others. I mean, so there is a lot of discussion concerning anticipatory governance, and that's something important. Or another piece of information is that the European Commission is presently working with 4 different ideas. The idea of sustainability, resilience, policy coherence, and anticipatory governance. So it's one of the official threads within the discussions of the Commission. And the hope is that someday they will perhaps be able to synthesize all them into a coherent framework. So far, there are 4 different issues, but anticipatory governance is one of these issues. So, I mean, we are talking about something that is relevant. So the first question is why anticipatory governance is getting hot? Why people are more and more interested now in this issue? Well, there are quite a number of reasons, but possibly they are all converging on one major outcome. The environmental, the operative, the environment in which governments should take decisions is different. Now, the 21st century environment is different from the environment of previous epoch, because there are quite a number of major transformations that are growing together. We all know that. I'm not saying anything new, but this has consequences for those that have the responsibility to take decisions. The climate crisis, obviously, no problem. Disruptive technologies that are coming, social changes. Think about the aging of population, gender issues, the coming back of ancient threats like rising inequalities, and so on and so forth. So, and all these issues bring in the problem of complexity from one side and acceleration of transformation from the other side. And these two poses very serious problems for legacy systems because, well, most legacy systems have been established before the discovery of complexity. So they have been established when things were at most complicated and not complex. So the way in which they work is well suited for the problems of the past century, of perhaps two past centuries, not for the problems of this century. And this obviously, well, raises quite a number of questions about how to change things in order to be able to address forthcoming changes. And my claim, I'll try to be as clear as possible, so even a bit provocative, is that the present understanding of anticipatory governance is remarkably poor. We have to dig deeper in the meaning of the very concept of anticipatory. Anticipatory governance is not a minor improvement of present frameworks. It's something completely different. We need to be broad in our understanding of what does it mean to be anticipatory within a legacy system. Why? Well, consider the classic proposition advanced by Fürth, which is one of the reference points for all those working with the idea of anticipatory governance. And he claimed that, well, what is needed? Open mind frame. Okay, great. But a bit weak. Feedback loops. Great, no problem. But this is good for many different issues, not for anticipatory governance in itself. Then foresight units, okay, that's something more. And we know how foresight units work, and this is something that can be improved, but it's something we have some experience about. The integration within the decision-making process, and we know that this is one of the big challenges, obviously. But I mean, it makes sense. But my claim is that this is great, no problem, but widely insufficient. We need more than that. My proposition is that we need what the Germans, here we are in Berlin, so what the Germans call Auftragstactik, which is the military doctrine of the German army, or in English, what is called the commander's intent, which is a completely different framework, claiming that those that should take decisions are the people in the field, because they have the information, they know what's happening. So bureaucracy should be reconsidered in a different, because velocity is much more important than precision. We have to act as soon as possible in order to face arising problems. So empower those that are acting in the field, which means, and the fact that the Germans have invented this framework is great, that orders can be disobeyed if that is helpful in order to achieve the aim advanced by those that are at the hand. And this is something completely different from what we are accustomed to. So my claim is that anticipatory governance is a new legacy system which is remarkably different from any other legacy system so far implemented. So it's not a problem of minor adjustment, it's a problem of rethinking completely the ways in which a government works, because we are in a different situation. Because governments have been established in a different epoch when the problems were different. They were much slower, of a different magnitude. Now we have different situations and different tools are needed. In the end, it's as simple as, and why this is so, well, I saw, of course, there will be many obstacles. There will be many, for many even obvious reasons against this very possibility. For instance, the power of well-established structures that won't love being reorganized or removed. There will be normative constraints. There will be the lack of best practices. We are moving I mean, we are learning by doing, in a sense. There is no clear framework we can copy or we can rely on. Poor understanding of complexity. Complexity remains a major issue. We have some understanding, but most legacy structures are well suited for complicated problems, not for complex ones. And then we need different ways of doing it and doing it. Lack of trust. And which is, I mean, most Western governments live from many decades in a situation in which citizens do not trust their own governments. Well, that's a major issue. We are going to face major transformations in a situation in which institutions cannot rely or can rely only to some degree to trust from their citizens. Well, that's not the best possible situation. And so, what else? Oops. Yeah, yes, that's okay. I'll stop here, and so I've been as short as possible in order to raise an issue. Anticipatory governance is not, in my understanding, I hope I'm wrong, but as far as I understand, anticipatory governance is something different from what we are accustomed to. Thank you.
Working now? Ah, yeah. Okay, yeah, we have time for discussion. So any comments, questions, remarks on this remarkable introduction to the session? I was really intrigued by this.
Thank you. I must say, when I listened to you, Roberto, I was tempted to ask a question, because you are advocating that you have to rethink the whole governmental structure. And you are also advocating the idea of have a new legal framework of doing it. So I'm just very, very curious, if you can elaborate a bit more about more concrete steps in that direction.
Well, the simplest answer is that the German army has been working with Auftrags tactics since the defeat in Jena, 1806 by Napoleon. So 200 years of experience. That's something. Of course, an army is not a civil organization, right? There are differences for obvious reasons, but there are 200 years of experience about how to develop an organization able to, to adapt as quickly as possible to a changing environment. So, there is something we can learn from.
Okay, well, thank you very much. This is very thought-provoking, I think. But at the same time, I would like to ask a question in the direction of what Eric was asking. As future researchers, in order, especially if we come up with brand new ideas, one methodology or one method or one tool to make clearer what we mean, how the future could look like, we build scenarios or something like this. So I'm curious if you could a little bit explain or give us a glimpse of how this new kind of anticipatory governance system would look like, maybe in one example. Because I know that 10 years ago, a first book came out with the title, Anticipatory Governance in the United States. Dozens of experienced politicians in Washington, thought about this concept. So maybe you have some ideas you can give us in order to become a little more clear. How would it look like? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think that what we usually do remains valuable. So introducing within a legacy system all the capacities of a futurist, so developing scenarios, conducting future exercise, all that part of the job remains valid, obviously. My claim is that is not enough. So it's a needed component. We have to train officials and give them the capacity to conduct future exercise. For sure, but there is something more robust behind that, because if the overall structure remains the same, I think that it will not be able to adapt. So what we have already done, great. Let's continue. Let's reinforce it. Let's develop ways for introducing, for instance, scenarios within a decision-making process. That's not in discussion. But then we have to help officials to understand which is the difference between a complicated situation and a complex situation. Because the strategies you have to use in the two cases are completely different. So here there is both theory and applications that are needed, and so on and so forth. So there are quite a number of steps in that direction. I'm not saying I have a complete blueprint, obviously not. What I'm saying is that be careful, because the challenges in front of us will require us to be as bold as possible in order to, try to do something, try to manage them. And of course, many experiments are needed. And then there is no obvious way of developing and implementing that transformation. Not one that I am able to see. There will be different, also because different structures have different needs, different cultures behind, different attitudes of people and citizens, so on and so forth. So we have literally to try. But the same is true. Think about the aging of population. It's exactly the same issue. No one knows how to deal with such an issue because it is unprecedented. We do not have historical experiences about such an issue. So we have to, to try to develop a strategy by doing things. So by committing mistakes and by coming back and, that kind of process.
Microphone, so and I will hand this around. And may I ask you, okay, to maybe also introduce yourself. Sorry, I didn't mention this before, but I think not everybody knows everybody, even in this community.
Okay, so thank you. I'm Sylvaine Mercury-Chapuis. I'm professor in management sciences in France. So I have a question for you, Roberto, about the system model of Mintzberg when he describes adhocracy. And adhocracy is a structure to interact with complex environment. So you have this typology, the bureaucracy, etc. And he finished with the adhocracy. And I would like to know your opinion about using this structure to have new best practice, because you say that there is a lack of practices, so maybe linked to also high reliability organization or this kind of structure.
Okay, one possibility is to distinguish, just very shortly, between those systems for which we have best practices. These are simple systems. Because a best practice means there is only one way of doing things, because all the other ways are sub-functional. So there is no discussion. That's the best way. There are what we call complicated systems, and in this case, we do not have any more best practices. We have good practices, which means there are different ways of doing things, and we should find a balance among them. So we need criteria for selecting. For instance, some way of doing things may be too expensive, and there may be budget constraints. Others may provide outcomes that last for longer or for shorter time. So we have to to make some balance. But in these two cases, experience, that is past information, is important. And that's available. But most problems are simply new. We do not have a reliable past experience to rely on. Think about the aging of population, that's the most, or the climate crisis. I mean, there are quite a number of issues that are simply new. And we are trying to discover what deserves to be done. In this case, we need a different framework. That's one side. What does it mean for a government, for instance, trying to destroy silos? Our government works for, different groups. So education from one side, and then international relations from the other, and so on. They work separately, as if things could be cut down as a cake. We know that things are much more related. So traditional silos should be reconsidered. But again, my claim is that we should open a discussion. I'm not saying I have the final answer. That would be, that's not the case. We should begin a deep discussion and try to understand what should be changed, in which way, and to develop ways for testing whether a transformation is heading in the right direction or not. So what I'm claiming, we need a long phase of experimentation. And we all know experimenting with legacy systems is not such an easy affair. But nevertheless, the problems are new. So we should try it, because the old structures will surely fail. That's my claim. So even if there are many problems, we should try to do something.
Actually, that echoes a bit my observation in the beginning, that we need to move from products, processes to structures. The things also when we were recently asked to do a study on recommending improvements on institutionalization of foresight in German government, we realized that we, from the future side, we actually cannot tackle this problem alone, and we work together with public administration people that really understand the structures in administration. And also in our interviews, the root cause, the most of the things we heard were not about futures work, but about structures. Structures hindering dealing with complexity. And this is what I also meant when saying we need to step up our theory and move towards the structures also. But maybe we need different people in our community also to help us with this. Sorry for intervening myself.
Thank you. Yes, hello. I'm Christian Neuhaus. I'm with Futures Affairs Office, a teacher at Freie Universität here in Berlin, and some other functions as well. Roberto, I have 2 points. First, with the term and concept of anticipatory government. Actually, I wonder what is the anticipatory in that concept, because I fully agree that we need some different ways of policy making and of course of making legal procedures as well. We need new structures maybe and new routines and etc. etc. But I think to point at Auftragstaktik is not sufficient, because as I understand it, Auftragstaktik alone is more or less the idea that you don't tell people what they are to do, but to give them a target, a goal, an intent, and they are to realize that intent depending on the specific actual situation as it develops. So this whole is not about anticipation, it is about agility, it is about the ability to act according to the actual current situation. So again, what is in the concept of anticipatory government, the anticipatory element? As far as when I remember my little Latin education, it means more or less taking or holding something in advance, anticipere. And I'm not from the fraction who thinks that it is really possible to know in advance, but there must be something different, and maybe you can say something on that idea of anticipatory government.
You are entirely right. Auftragstaktik is a tactic, is a way of doing things in the present. So there is no anticipation in that component. The anticipation comes from the commander's intent, so the direction towards which one should head. So it means it depends on the future exercise we have done. That's the properly anticipatory component. But the issue is that seeing different possible futures without modifying the ways in which we work is ineffective. So we should have a vision, for sure, and we have tools for that, and we can provide methods, we can provide frames of mind for decision makers to go in our direction, but then the structure should be modified as well. So the two components are needed, and by working together, perhaps the outcomes will be better, perhaps, because the future remains obscure, and we have to learn to survive day by day after day, obviously.
Okay, I have one more. We have time for one or two, maybe. I see Sabine. Was there somebody else? Sorry, because of the light, sometimes I cannot see so good. So.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm Sabine Hafner-Zimmermann from Steinbeis in Karlsruhe, former colleague of Eileen many years ago. Thank you for your presentation, Roberto. I think it's very relevant, and we all know that it's very much needed to have a more proactive role by government, by policymakers in tackling future challenges. And that's what you said, basically. But what's the role of, or what do you see the role of foresight as being in this process? Because you know, the initiative, I think, needs to come much more from within policy making than from the outside. You know, we don't want to deliver only reports and recommendations to policy making, but policy makers need to realize and in a more proactive way embrace this thinking and act upon it, and ask the foresight community probably, or, you know, acquire this knowledge proactively. And I think that's a very different view, and it probably makes it more, or our role will be much more different than we perceive it today, probably. And it's not making the challenge easier, you know, to bringing our know-how, our intentions into policy-making processes.
Do not believe in working for. I believe in working with, meaning writing a report. We know what's happened. A report is read more or less carefully. There will be some cherry picking, and then it will end in a drawer. That's not the proper way of working with the future. We have to work together with officials and develop a better understanding of possible future challenges. So it's much slower, obviously, but it goes deeper. And at that point, something might change, because at that point, those that are involved may really begin to understand what does it mean to develop scenarios, or whatever other method is used. So we have to find ways to infuse future studies within a bureaucratic structure. And if so, and it will take time, providing we have enough time, because that's the other side of the question, when it will become one of the competencies, one of the knowledge they have, they can use our tools in order to, for instance, develop strategies in a different way. So a strategy that is not only this way, but a strategy that includes a number of variations, and so being able to adapt quicker to whatever happens outside, and so on and so forth. So it means a vision and helping officials to develop vision, long-term visions. When the Chinese have a long-term vision. It has been published a few years ago and lasts for 2049. It is part of what they are doing. We work when we are lucky in 5 years, 5-year steps. Well, there is something that we need to be reconsidered in order to play our game, to try to do something.
Okay, I would like to move now to last presentation. I saw you, maybe you can integrate in the last discussion. I think we will come back to these issues also. So to give Lars also the same time. Yeah, thanks a lot.